Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. I appreciate you guys coming and visiting me. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. As you can see, I already have like makeup and stuff on a little bit anyways, but we're going to talk about bone throwing today. Something that I feel like is really, really important to talk about. It's not talked about enough, even though it's one of the oldest forms of divination in the entire world, and almost every single culture did it in some way, shape, or form. And today we're going to talk about a few of the cultures that did what they did and how they did it and what their process was and all that other stuff. Now, this is going to start a new series basically on bone throwing, where every week I'm going to come out with a video. Either today we're going to talk about how it all began, and then we're going to start talking about how to set it up, what kind of pieces you need, what kind of altar you need. We'll get into all that as the videos go on. But today, start first with the history of it, of course, because that's so very important to know. If you're going to start throwing bones, you need to know the history behind it. That's why it's so important to know your ancestry as well. So we're going to get into all that. And if you guys have any questions or anything, just drop them down there in the comments. I'll be glad to answer them. This is something that I've been doing for a long time. And so I really, really enjoy doing it and also talking about it. And so I'm just going to give you guys a little history lesson today, if that sounds cool with y'all. All right. So what exactly is bone throwing is probably what you're asking. Bone throwing is using bones, shells, curios, crystals, charms, and also other different ways of being able to tell somebody their future or to help them spiritually, help them heal. It's used for a lot of different things. Like I say, it's one of the oldest forms of divination in the entire world. Every single culture did it in some way, shape, way, or form. And we're going to go over that today. Nobody really knows exactly, like, to the extent as to where bone throwing came from. There's no like exact location where it started. They just know that cultures throughout history have done it. But the ones that were the Zulu people of South Africa were the ones that were really, really, really into it. And so we can kind of pick up from what they did and talk about that from there. So in South Africa, that's where we're going to start first, since that's basically where it was picked up from. They had a person called a sagnoma. Okay, and that was a set of beliefs and practices that were related to ancestral ancestors. Okay, and they had two groups: the sagnoma, who would work with the ancestors, and then the ignayas, which was the healing properties of plants. So you had two different kinds of people doing this. This practice made its way to America, of course, on the slave trip, on the slave ships, unfortunately. Also in Central and Southern Africa, they would shake the bones, shells, curios, and more, just basically the same way I do, because that vibration cleanses them. You know what I mean? So then we can move on to the Botswana people. They had four principal bones, okay? And there were several accessory bones, but they had the four main ones, and then you can add some more if you want. They also included shells and charms. The predominant bone was the person, that was seeking guidance from the healer. And so that bone would have a name and a gender. Then we have the Shona people of Zimbabwe, who used tablets. Now, these tablets can be made of wood, stone, or bone. Each tablet had a name and was assigned a meaning. Zigzag borders were on two of the front of the big ones. Two of the junior tablets just had notches at the bottom. One would be marked as a male with a single notch, and then the female was notched with two notches. The senior tablets don't have notches, but they have the pictures carved into them. The male was marked as a spear. The female could be marked as a house or an eye. The stones are cast out onto a surface, and one reading can be up to 20 or 40 throws, which is like mind-blowing to me. Wow, you should throw these four tablets like 20 times. That's a lot of information. But and they can fall facing up or down, and there's 16 combinations that can be the outcome for the Shona people of Zimbabwe using tablets as divination. Now hold on if I can say this, Yoruba Obi, which is a way of throwing, they used palm nuts or koala nuts from the koala tree, which is indigenous to Nigeria. This is where we are now. God manifests as various avatars on earth, and they call them Orshias, okay? And he shows affinity and prophecy to the world. Now, doing Obi, and this is what's confusing to a lot of people. They think it's cowrie shells, but it's not. It is actually koala nuts, palm nuts that you use. And every time that they do a throw, they use fresh nuts. It's not like something that they keep. It's like they do a throw with those, and then they toss them. And if somebody wants a throw, they got to go and pick some more. You know what I mean? And so they were shaken out and, cast or whatever, and the person would read it. There may be, there's different types that you could use 4 or more. Some people used like 16, but you can use 4 or more. You can always kind of stretch these out to your own little whatever, you know what I mean? And it was also used on a board that was called an openata to contain the obi. So you also need a certain kind of board to throw these nuts on. They're not cowrie shells, just pointing that out. And yeah, that is doing obi. It's throwing koala nuts. The position of the nuts correlate to a symbol from the 16th principle Aldafa, which is basically a Yoruba text, and there's 256 possible outcomes for the 16 interpretations of the koala nuts. Yeah. So if all land up, that's a good blessing. That's blessings, good. But if they all land down, except the second seed is not, that symbolizes longevity. Lord of mercy, I can't talk today. And so there's a lot of different combinations. Obviously, I don't know every single one of them because a lot of these people didn't write this down. This is something that was handed over word of mouth. You know what I mean? So it was taught. One of my favorites that I found was so interesting was in Central America, corn casting. Yes, corn casting. And I'm not talking about just going out to their cornfields and like picking a piece of corn and getting some corn kernels off. No, they grew this corn just to do divination with the kernels. Okay, it's so interesting. It originated with the Aztecs. And the dried corn kernels were, like I say, grown special just for divinational purposes. Some use less than 5, some use over 100. Yeah, the corn casting can go from here all the way up to here, depending on how much you can read. Because I always suggest to people that first start throwing bones of any kind, start small, and then to move your way up into the bigger stuff. It just makes it a little bit easier for you to process. But some of these, each kernel had a top and a bottom, and a front and a back. Okay, and if the kernel fell flat, then that would be negative. Like if it fell flat on the face part, that would be a negative. And if the concave part was upwards, then that was positive. Okay. Now we get to the knuckle bones, which is the knuckle bones from sheep, goats, and horses and deer were used across Asia, Eastern Europe, Mongolia, and China. In Mongolia, the bones are called Shanghai, and each side is named: horse, goat, sheep, and camel. The knuckle bones are decorated better for readings. The horses and sheep sides were good luck, and the goat and the camel, not so good luck. So if you cast and you got 4 horses, that's like really lucky. If you cast and you get like 2 sheep and a goat, then that's not so great. You know what I mean? So that's knuckle throwing. In Shanghai, China, this one's pretty cool. They had oracle bones. This is what they called them. Oracle bones were used to predict the future or to see fortunes or just any kind of bad luck. Priests actually would do this. They would use the oracle bones, and they would help the kings with battles and decisions and things like that. So what they do is they gather the animal and they clean it. And the scapula is removed of any bits of flesh, hair, whatever, tendon. It's clean. And then they burn it using hot rods or a piece of coal. Doesn't really matter which. Reading the cracks in the break. They actually read the break of it because they apply so much heat it breaks the clavicle, and they read those cracks. How they do that, I do not know. Wish I knew how, but it's so cool. And so sometimes they would drill like small holes into the bones, and so that's why they would break, I guess, to make sure they broke. But the Chinese really wanted them to break so they could read the cracks that way. Now, this kind of divination actually has a name, and it's called Scapulimancy. And the Scottish did the same thing, only they did it a different way. Now, what they would do is they would get the sheep and get the right scapula. Okay, now this sheep was honored like you wouldn't believe. It was like the most special sheep in the world, right? It's killed in a certain way. It is very an honorable thing. Now, when they would eat the meat off the bones, the Scottish also did this. They would let the higher up people, be whatever. And so it was forbidden to touch the bones with your teeth or your nails. So you had to bite into the meat without scraping the bone with your teeth or using your nails to damage the bone of any kind. Then the bones are cleaned and the marks on the surface are read by a divinationist. Now, the Scots, they didn't write down a lot of their rituals, but they did do the scapula thing. Like I say, they would take the bone, they would apply heat to the scapula, only they would read the cracks inside the scapula of the spreading out of the cracks through the bone. They would read it that way instead of the bone actually breaking. And the Scots also kind of had a little superstition that if you had a human bone, you control their soul, that human's soul. But you had to return it by a certain time, or that person would take control of your life. That spirit would have control over you. I couldn't imagine keeping a human bone. I obviously have my kids' baby teeth. That is technically a human bone, but to carry their soul around, and to use, most of the time to use it for bad things, probably. It just wasn't, yeah. It was a that was a scary practice, It was the fear that the soul would take revenge, basically, if you didn't return the bone to the body after you got finished doing whatever it is you wanted to do to it. Now, there's a few other mancies that we should probably go over that are pretty cool. Like oomancy, this mancy is using eggs to remove negative energy from your body. And if you are a witch, you know exactly what I'm talking about when you take that egg and you run it all over your body from head to toe, all the way, everywhere, and cleanse your body, and then you read the yolk as it falls into the water type deal. Terrafumi is reading shapes and different things in smoke. Then we have acute omancy, which is reading where needles fall. So you think of throwing needles. I feel like that would kind of hurt. Obviously, if you're using a bowl, it's not going to hurt, but I thought that was pretty cool. Then you got karyomancy, which is interpreting wax, which is something a lot of us like to do. We burn a candle and then we like to read the wax afterwards if there's anything left. And then you had demonomancy. Come on. Basically, you're using demons to do divination and to read futures and things like. You communicate with demons as a way of doing divination, which is totally cool. That's how it's that. If that's your vibe, that's your vibe. The Hostada, the Shona practice. This is the throwing of the 4 tablets that I told you guys about. The Ifa is the Yoruba transition of using the 4 obi nuts or palm/koala nuts. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. Necromancy is getting messages from the dead, and osteomancy is bone reading, which is what I do. So you're probably asking, what exactly is bone casting, since we've been sitting here talking about it forever. It's witchcraft associated with beliefs in ancestors and the ability to influence events, and animism. Now, animism is something I am very, very, very much so absorbed in, and that is knowing that everything has a spiritual energy, whether it's a tree, to a little tiny ladybug, even to a mosquito, it has some kind of spiritual energy. Okay. And so a lot of that, and the animism has to be that way in this because of the knowledge of animals and the knowledge of plants and things that you need to know in order to correspond meanings with your bones. So, what does divination mean? Divination is being inspired by God to gain insight by using divine methods, rituals, and practices, is what it is. Whether it's to tell somebody their future, to make predictions, communicate with the dead and their ancestors, or just to ward off negative spirits. And there's two types. There's intuitive, which is what I do. When I read the bones, I actually can communicate and hear my ancestors telling me things to tell the querent within the throw. But I also do the inductive as well, which is extracting and interpreting meanings from the objects. Because in my bones, I give them certain meanings and certain things like that. Know that when you're working with your ancestors, it's best to have an altar and to leave offerings. Now, and I say to work with your ancestors, and I understand that a lot of people out there like to use deities as well, but I would not suggest using deities in a bone throw. In my personal opinion, deities come to you when you need their help, like just for you. Okay, I honestly don't feel like it's a correct reading to get a read for, say, Freya to tell you something, because it could be for you. You know, they only do things for you when they appear to you. And so, but your ancestors, that's a whole different thing. That's your family. Those are people that are always walking with you. They are always with you. Their spirit, their everything is always with you after they pass. And so to reach out to them and have that ability to ask your ancestors, you know, my grandmother comes through my head very quickly when I do bone throws. She gives out information, especially when it comes to like pregnancies and things like that. She likes to give months. And so far, she has not been wrong. Let me tell you, I've had so many girls come and say, I know I asked you if I get pregnant next week, and you said it was going to be next July. Well, guess what? It's July, and I'm pregnant, you know. And that's not just from me reading the bones. That's me getting interpretation from my grandmother, where she's saying it's hot and it's very, very in the middle of the year. So I say July, you know, and then she confirms it. It's just something that I hear or something that I feel. But as we go along in these videos, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do this. But I'm also going to set you guys up correctly to do this. So having the knowledge of the history can you know, evolve your way of throwing the bones the way that you want to throw the bones. You know, you can give a certain bone a meaning. Say you find a bone out in the middle of the woods and you don't know what animal it goes to, but you connect it to that bone. Well, just because you don't know the animal doesn't mean you can't use it. You can still use it and give it its own meaning. But it's also good to know what it is behind the animals, the light and the shadow side of animals, which we will get to in this series. So that way you can see if that bone, say the raccoon baculum always stands for best friend or lover. You can look at the pieces around that and decide whether or not they are being sincere or if they're being, you know, kind of shady. You know, you can look at the other pieces around it, because a raccoon is a scavenger, but they're also very, very loving to their family. They're very protective. And so that's why that bone has always been stood for love and things like that. But I'll also have another piece in my throw for romantic relationships. I think of the raccoon baculum as a best friend. Like my best friend is my husband, so it kind of doesn't work for me. But other than that, bone throwing can be so customizable. And don't get overwhelmed by all this information, because this is just history. This is just talking about what bone throwing is, what it can do, and all that fun stuff. We're going to get into building altars. We're going to get into cleansing your bones and yourself before you start your throw. Actually throwing the bones, and we'll start with a few at a time. I'm going to give you guys the meanings of. There's some bones that have set meanings. Like I say, the raccoon baculum is one of those. Mandibles, obviously, means speech. There's certain things that have certain meanings, and I'm going to give that to you guys too in this series. But today, we went over the history, and I hope that you guys really took something away from it, because knowing your ancestry, you can apply some of these into your witchcraft. I have Northern Africa and Southern African and Native American in me. And so I kind of do the Native African style of throwing, where I use bones, shells, curios, roots, and things like that. So we'll get into all that in this series. So if that's something that interests you, definitely hit that subscribe button, because we're going to be talking about a lot of bones on here. And because I really want you guys to start learning how to do this, because it's almost a lost art by this point in time, because not that many people do it and not that many people know how to do it. So I'm going to show you guys, and we're going to talk about it. And if you have any questions, drop it in the comments below. But if nobody's told you today, I love you. So y'all have a wonderful day.